Good afternoon. I hope you've enjoyed the first day of our conference. I'm John Newby, the CEO of the Virginia Biotechnology Association. The biotech capital region has hundreds of companies operating on the leading edge of innovation. And we are very fortunate to have in our region companies who are not only engaged in providing solutions for current healthcare emergencies and needs, but are preparing for those that are in the future. We're now very happy to have with us today one of those companies, Phlow Corporation from Petersburg, Virginia. And speaking of federal funding, as we did in the previous panel, you may recall the news in 2020 when Phlow was awarded a $354 million BARDA grant with options that could take that number to upwards of $800 million for the production of active pharmaceutical ingredients for essential medicines. Today, we will hear from Phlow co-founders, Dr. Eric Edwards and Dr. Frank Gupton, about Phlow's work and their use of data and analytics in their production of essential medicines for America and for the world. Eric and Frank, good afternoon. Good to have you with us. I'd like to first start with this question for you. Can each of you take a moment to briefly introduce yourselves to the audience, your history, your background, how you got here? Frank, can we start with you?
Yeah, John, thanks very much for the opportunity to talk to you today about the work that we're doing. My background is, I'm currently in academia, but I would consider myself a non-traditional academic. I spent approximately 30 years in the chemical and the pharmaceutical industry and retired in 2007. And then I joined the faculty at VCU with a great opportunity that was presented to me by the two deans of the Humanities and Science and the Engineering School. And with the idea of building a bridge between chemistry faculty and chemical engineering faculty. And one of the last things I did when I was in industry, John, was to develop a process to make an HIV drug, which turned out to be one of the world's most profitable drugs. And from that became a platform for a lot of the research that we've been doing right now, both with regards to a strategy for developing these drugs more efficiently, the processes, but as well looking at this particular area of global healthcare and essential medicines.
Great, thanks, Frank. Eric?
Good afternoon, and thanks for having me as well. I'm co-founder and CEO of Phlow. Phlow is an essential medicines impact company that is working to make the U.S. a country where every human being has access to the essential medicines necessary to sustain life and conquer disease. I got my BS in biology, PhD in pharmaceutical sciences, and Doctor of Medicine degrees at Virginia Commonwealth University, Medical College of Virginia. I often joke that I've tried unsuccessfully to get out of Richmond, Virginia my entire life. And it's always kept me here, and it's been a great place to live and build these companies and raise a family. Previously, I was co-founder of Kaleo, which was a pharmaceutical company, still is, in Richmond, Virginia. And during my 16 years there, I served in a variety of capacities. I was the chief science officer responsible for overall scientific strategy and all the pharmaceutical development programs, the chief medical officer responsible for developing the medical affairs team and capability while we operationalized the clinical program strategy. And then I ended up as vice president of innovation, overseeing research and development and our pipeline, as well as new product strategy. The co-inventor of multiple marketed products, including AubiQ, which is an epinephrine autoinjector for the treatment of allergic emergencies, and have just been serving our community as an entrepreneur. I've been serving the community also as a volunteer. I still volunteer with a local rescue squad, including responding to 911 calls and training paramedics in pre-hospital emergency care. And then I love serving on a lot of the boards and startups and heavily invested in the entrepreneurial startup community here in Central Virginia. So it's a pleasure being here today.
Thank you, Eric, very much. And thanks for being such a vital part of our community here. Frank, you mentioned that you were drawn out of retirement a handful of years ago. And obviously it has to be more than just the thrill of coming back into academia. What at your core were you looking to bring back to our community and indeed the world by coming back and leaving retirement, or as you would say sometimes, I heard you say, failing retirement?
Yeah, I think it's actually pretty accurate, John. If you talk to my wife, she would say that I not only failed it, but I failed it miserably. And I think that the interesting thing about what we're doing, and she really got this, was, she told me early on, she said, you've had a lot of great experiences in industry, but you haven't had a chance to share them with other people and transfer that knowledge to this next generation of engineers and scientists. And I think that's one of the great gifts that I've been given, is having the ability to interact with these students. And it's a lot about being able to share with them what not to do as much as what to do. And the mantra in our laboratory is make new mistakes, not old mistakes. I made those, and I'm really interested in the students pushing the envelope to find these new areas of opportunity. And the really core part of what I'm doing is about looking at how we can take these scientists and engineers and put them in a position to really address the grand challenges of the 21st century in both healthcare and technology. And in doing that, not making the same mistakes that we made in the 20th century. So with that, I look at the approach that we're taking with regards to a fundamental problem. And I was very fortunate to have been on the other side of the fence with regards to the pharmaceutical industry. So I got to see a lot about, kind of where the sausage was being made and how it was being made. And I think that I've got the kind of a different background from most people that have come out of big pharma, in that I started out in commodity chemicals where pennies made a difference. And I've tried to take that strategy and apply it to some of these essential drugs to be able to assure that we're producing them in the most efficient way that we can. And in doing that, it's going to be able to increase the availability of these drugs to the people that need them the most, whether it's an HIV drug or a drug that's currently not being manufactured or with limited access, or a drug that's in shortage because of the fact that people don't want to make them and there's no money to be made at them. If we can create some margin on that and make it a sustainable platform for producing the materials, then we can eliminate a lot of the drug shortages that we're currently seeing in the marketplace.
Eric, how did you become associated with Frank and Medicines for All, and ultimately co-found with him Flo Corporation?
Well, Frank has been a colleague and a friend and a mentor for years, and we often catch up on what we're up to. And I have been consulting for a while, and Frank cornered me in a parking lot one day and said, you need to come and see what we're up to at Medicines for All. I had been interested in tackling really tough problems and had already gained a keen interest in trying to solve for drug shortages in the United States. It's something that had personally impacted me. I've been on that ambulance when someone has called 911 and we go to reach into the drug box and the drugs that you need weren't there. They weren't readily available. They've been in shortage. So Frank and I had a conversation one day in a parking lot that led to me shadowing him and his team and learning more about the great solutions that they've built up at VCU and Medicines for All. And then we just started talking to some like-minded individuals that ultimately served as a foundation for Flo around how do we tackle this poorly designed global supply chain that has caused our healthcare system to be dangerously dependent on other nations for our most critical essential medicines, many of these essential medicines in shortage. So we talked about solutions, and what I've always admired about Frank is he's a solutions-oriented individual who applies innovation and really kind of tackles things from different perspectives. That intersection, as he mentioned, of having someone who's been in the industry, who truly knows how to translate science into actual products, coupled with what he's been able to do and building one of the most impressive research and development labs in the country relating to advanced flow chemistry and continuous manufacturing. It really got me excited about what could we do to apply this technology platform that he started with, working alongside the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation on drugs for the developing world. How could we have solutions that could come together to solve for some of the greatest challenges that we're facing here? So we got to talking, we started digging into the data, I found out that more than 80% of the active pharmaceutical ingredients and chemical ingredients used to manufacture generics and over-the-counter drugs are produced abroad now. The majority of those ingredients coming from China and India. And really COVID-19 amplified these mounting concerns over medicine shortages and the pharmaceutical supply chain. And Flo had already begun the process of coming up with a solution by working with great partners like Medicines for All, partners including Civica, the largest nonprofit pharma company, Ampac Fine Chemicals, the United States Pharmacopoeia. We had already started talking through how could we solve for the challenges of drug shortages before COVID hit. And when COVID hit, we decided to go and just pave a pathway and make sure that the previous administration and our government knew that we were going to run into significantly vulnerable supply chain challenges if something wasn't done immediately. And that's how we got involved. We put together the business plan, the strategy, and formulated the team, got our foundational management team up and running, and then we're able to be blessed and fortunate with a large government contract from the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority to try to reshore this critical industrial base on behalf of America.
That's great. And just to remind everyone, Flo was established in 2020, correct?
Correct. January 2020, we incorporated, but we have been working for, what, Frank, probably a year before that on the solution, on the strategy. We had already met with the FDA. We knew what we were going to be doing to try to solve for the unique challenges, especially around our active pharmaceutical ingredient supply chain. But then when COVID hit, really we formulated the strategic partnerships, these unique partnerships to reimagine the domestic drug production supply chain that would improve overall pharmaceutical quality, availability, and most importantly, transparency and pricing. So that's what we're doing at Flo. Everything we're doing is focused on fully securing a domestic capability to produce the most common used and vital medications in America, ranging from pain relievers to key drugs to control blood pressure, drugs that help get patients on ventilators, and antibiotics, just drugs that are simple, sterile, injectable drugs primarily, but a lot of others have not been focusing on them, leaving our supply chain to be extremely vulnerable. So our goal is to level the playing field for essential medicine manufacturing and affordability by using a proven advanced manufacturing platform and taking Frank and his team's great work at Medicines for All and really amplifying and catalyzing that activity to apply continuous chemistry and novel advanced manufacturing approaches to small molecules, including the fact that in America, 90% of Americans are taking generics, not innovator drugs. And we think it's really important to secure this industrial base of essential medicines for a healthy future.
I think it's a great story of preparation meeting opportunity, and you guys are really off to the races very quickly. Frank, I'd like to ask you this question, which is, the technology that Flo uses comes from your work at Medicines for All. Can you briefly summarize the advantages of this technology and your process over a typical API manufacturing process?
Yeah, so John, I think we take a very holistic approach at this. And first of all, when we were approached by the government to look at this onshoring activity, we explained to them that this is not a problem with regards to the formulated product or even the active ingredient. It's an end-to-end problem because most of these foreign manufacturers are producing all the starting materials in addition to the active ingredient and the formulated product. So if you have to rely on an offshore supply of the starting materials, you're still vulnerable. So this gets back to the original strategy that we had when we were looking at these processes, was starting with very simple building blocks that we could use to make these advanced, fairly complicated materials. And in doing that, you did two things. One is you were able to solidify the supply chain by using domestically sourced building blocks. But typically, these building blocks were also relatively inexpensive, so that we could actually not only address the supply chain issues, but also the cost issues. And that's the kind of the starting point for the work that we were doing. So once we've developed a process that has really good economics from a chemistry perspective, then we take that process and we look at it from the aspect of what is the most cost-effective manufacturing platform to produce it in. And what we have focused on mostly, as Eric mentioned earlier, is this issue about using continuous pharma manufacturing. And the really important issue here is this is not new. It's just new to pharma. The commodity chemicals people have been doing this for years. And the reason why they use it is because they can't afford not to. The margins are so tight in commodity chemicals that pennies make a difference. And so taking that mentality from a manufacturing platform and applying it to a pharmaceutical drug target is, kind of the essence of the how we can reduce the manufacturing platform. And when you look at it from the perspective of an offshore competing effectively with an offshore manufacturer, the reason why companies went offshore was because of high labor costs associated with batch manufacturing, which was more labor intensive. Now, if we're going to be able to be competitive, then we've got to be able to we're not going to drive down the cost of labor in the United States. But what we can do is reduce the overall labor cost by using automated systems. And when you start thinking about our gross domestic product, the pharma industry represents a major percentage of that in the healthcare industry. But it's one of the few areas where we haven't really gotten to automated systems to manufacture more efficiently. And the reason is because that, and a lot of times, is one of those things that is often discounted when we're looking at the manufacturing elements of the product. So it's really a holistic approach where we look at the chemistry, the building blocks, and the manufacturing platform.
Today's conference is about big data and AI and analytics and how they're currently being used in biotechnology. Eric, can you tell us how Phlow uses these tools in the development and manufacturing of essential medicines?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So continuous manufacturing in the pharma industry, like any continuous process industry, is based on efficient production with a clear goal. Final products that should be of a higher quality and created in a shorter period of time. And when that happens, the entire healthcare system improves. For years, however, the healthcare system has been reactive instead of proactive when it comes to the essential medicine supply chain. The focus, John, has been on monitoring and managing drug shortages instead of preventing them. As far too often, we hear at Phlow very real stories of critical drugs that are in shortage that take months or even years for manufacturers to address. But now, thanks to the digitalization of healthcare, coupled with advancements in analytics, there's an opportunity for our industry to model, simulate, and predict future shortages of essential medicines before they occur. Historically, these models, they relied primarily on supply-side data, but moving forward, the widespread deployment of electronic healthcare records, other provider-based information technology systems, point-of-care data, it really provides an ideal opportunity for Phlow to enrich these models with demand-side data and combine these data sources together to create the next generation of robust, real-time predictive capabilities necessary to prevent drug shortages. It's why at Phlow, one of the very first individuals that we hired was Dr. Dave Levin, who was the previous Chief Medical and Information Officer at Cleveland Clinic. And what we're trying to do is leverage data and analytics, data and artificial intelligence in the production of future essential medicines that are critical to a company like Phlow. And we're looking for process improvements and to improve greater productivity to get ahead of that next drug shortage. So it begins with better data and analytics to determine patterns, and subsequent optimization of routine activities, logistics, and production, with the ultimate goal of producing high-quality essential medicines readily available when we see an increase in demand to get ahead of drug shortages. So that's just one way we're trying to tackle data and analytics on the supply chain side to prevent drug shortages versus being reactive. And then I'll allow Frank to speak a little bit more on the chemistry side, because there's a lot of exciting use of data and analytics as we develop new routes.
Frank?
Thanks, Eric. I think that we look at it again from the standpoint of an end-to-end solution. And so when you start thinking about it from a manufacturing platform, if you're going to automate products or the processes to produce these materials, then what it means is that you're going to need strong feedback on all the critical data for the critical process parameters in the processes to be able to have feed-forward feedback control strategies to ensure that we can maintain product quality. And I think Eric touched on this earlier, is that's one of the key elements of what we're trying to achieve here with the collaboration between us and the U.S. Pharmacopoeia and other partners to ensure that not only we produce the drugs cost effectively, but we do it in a way that ensures that we're meeting or exceeding all the quality specifications from the FDA. And this gets back to this issue about control. So we want to make sure that we can control these processes effectively. And that's going to generate a huge amount of data that has to be evaluated, processed in real time in order to be able to continuously produce material that's on specification. The good news about a continuous platform is you can make a lot of material very quickly. The bad news is you can make a lot of bad material very quickly. So there has to be that feedback loop to ensure that you're always making product of the highest quality in real time. That's one aspect of what we do on the front end of manufacturing. But then you start thinking about it from the chemistry perspective. This is the part that I've learned over the years. Everybody's biased, and we're biased based on our life experiences. And I can tell you, when I look at a drug target, I start thinking about ways to put the molecule or disconnect the molecule so that I can put it together more efficiently. But it's based on my previous knowledge of chemistry that worked in my hands and chemistry that didn't work in my hands. And I've always tended to migrate towards those types of reactions that worked well from my experiences and away from the ones that didn't work very well. So what that does is it can exclude you from potentially viable options that may be more cost effective. So this whole idea about AI with regards to retrosynthetic analyses becomes really important in how we look at all the different methods for producing the drug target from a chemistry strategy perspective. And the AI tends to be a lot more, has to reduce the bias in that exercise, and is more agnostic with regards to how we can produce these things, or at least evaluate these processes more efficiently. So that's kind of the two ends of the spectrum that we see with what we're doing in our laboratory and developing these methodologies.
You know, if I may, it's not so dissimilar to what we saw in the industry occurring years ago when high throughput screening technology started taking form, where these discovery engines helped identify different targets on a much faster basis, leveraging computer technology. You can imagine a situation where we're able, given Frank's scenario there, to really tease through very quickly different routes to put a chemical together and to put a compound together, leveraging what is known about different reactions. And I think that putting in that level of automation in the future makes a ton of sense, and there aren't a lot of people who are doing it. Flo can play a leadership role alongside Medicines for All as we do that. And then a couple other practical and pragmatic implications of AI. You can also use it to predict the optimal production schedule for an essential medicine based on current inventory levels, our current demand from our customers, and the total capacity that we have in our system, which means that Flo can minimize waste optimize output so there's an ample supply of the most vital medicines when they are needed, and you're not having to just make batches based off of what we think the market's going to need, but what they actually are utilizing. We also have the capability of using data and analytics and artificial intelligence to optimize the manufacturing of essential medicines and their ingredients based off of purchase orders that are coming in, customer needs. This allows us to take into account the number of products that are available at any time and what will be needed to keep up with the demand for those medicines to avoid shortages. So, when Frank says it's an end-to-end type of solution where you leverage data and analytics, we really see that as foundational to helping secure the American essential medicine pharmaceutical supply chain to create resiliency and, as Frank mentioned, most importantly, improve the quality of the products that we're producing on into the future.
Yeah, if I could just add something to Eric's comment, I think this is really important. I think that one of the charges that we have is to start to build a strategic reserve of these materials, and being able to forecast in real time what that reserve needs to look like, and being able to adjust in real time becomes a really important element to our success in this area.
It's very true, and I'd like to continue with that point on the Strategic National Reserve. And Eric, I'd like to ask you, most of us on this event today are aware of the United States' Strategic National Stockpile of supplies, medicines, and devices for national emergencies. How does what you're doing at Phlow, how does it fit into meeting our country's broader strategic essential medicine needs?
Yeah, great question. Well, just to start, one of the first things that we were tasked with as a part of this HHS and then ASPR, which stands for the Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response, their office, and the BARDA contract was an immediate surge response and immediate manufacturing of key essential medicines to feed the Strategic National Stockpile last year, when the country was seeing in the news our concerns around the supply for just basic medical equipment, PPE, trying to find ventilators. We were the ones who were right up front trying to work to get the essential medicines into the Strategic National Stockpile in order to serve the needs of the hospitals and to have redundancy in case we did not have an adequate supply so that we could get patients onto the ventilator. These were drugs that helped get them sedated, other pain medicines, antibiotics. They didn't really have a strong supply of those essential medicines into the SNS, and Phlow was one of the first companies in the country in order to support, to help facilitate supporting that effort. The second thing, and more importantly, tags on to what my colleague, Dr. Gupton just mentioned, and that is we need to really think through how our supply chain works for the future. Right now, the supply chain through the SNS holds finished dosage forms. So these are actual drugs that are in a vial or a syringe, capsules, tablets. And while that's okay, the problem is that's the most expensive dosage form. And you can imagine for any one medicine, you might have multiple concentrations and presentations that are needed by the healthcare system. So we came up with a better way to try to support resiliency in the supply chain and be more efficient and responsive by establishing what's called the Strategic Active Pharmaceutical Ingredient Reserve, or SAFER for short. And the idea around this is it's modeled after the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, where we can have a secure supply of our country's most critical essential medicines in a form, the active pharmaceutical ingredient that is the most vulnerable, but is also the most cost effective. The shelf life of the API is often 4 or 5 times that of a finished dosage form. A vial of an injectable medicine sometimes has a year or less expiry dating, whereas an active pharmaceutical ingredient can have 5 to 10 years or even more. So the idea is, let's establish a robust, resilient reserve of the most critical active pharmaceutical ingredients for then conversion into finished dosage forms, working through a network of manufacturers, including our partner Civica, when needed in the presentation that America needs, leveraging, going back right to this conversation and the importance of this conversation, data and analytics that tells us what's the demand. So when the data at the point of care in a hospital shows there's been a spike in the utilization of this sedative or this particular drug, we can pull that API out if it's vulnerable or we don't have a robust supply of that product, and then convert it within a matter of a few weeks. That is being responsive in a supply chain, and through the Strategic API Reserve, we are working alongside the federal government to produce the next generation of our strategic national stockpile and really preparing us for a future pandemic response.
And if I could just add one other thing to that, John,
Surely.
It's really important. You know, first of all, Eric will attest to this. I'm very cheap, and I'm always looking for a low cost way of doing things. And this, the API is clearly the low cost point in the supply chain, but equally important, once you've formulated a product and it goes off exceeds the shelf life, you have to throw it away. For an active ingredient, all you have to do is rework it. And if you have a rework procedure, you can retain that material. So it can actually go on almost indefinitely, which significantly reduces the overall cost of the material in the long haul.
Thank you for that point. Eric, I'd like to ask you this question, which is, you know, Flo, both of you at Flo and your entire team, you're essentially leading the charge for the domestic production of medicines. From your vantage point, Eric, do you think the recent pandemic and the supply chain challenges that we've seen will make the United States make more investments in strategic domestic medical products and medicines? Or is this great nearly $800 million bolus that you received from BARDA, is that going to be one of the last that we see?
No, it's a great question. Fortunately, this is just the beginning. This might be one of the very few bipartisan issues that we certainly have seen transcend politics for sure. It started with the previous administration, and now the current administration is really doubling down on this idea that we need to make certain things here in the United States, and the essential medicine supply chain is one of them. So there's been a supply chain review. The Biden administration, Congress, and others have set up teams in order to try to focus on what are the right incentives and what are the right policies that will really get others to follow the lead that Flo has set out to catalyze additional domestic manufacturing activity. We've already seen companies starting to bring back manufacturing here. There was just an announcement last week around a new company that is set up to bring back penicillin manufacturing, which hasn't been made here in years. So I think the domestic prioritization of manufacturing, especially advanced manufacturing, is here to stay, as well as looking at supply chain resiliency and other methods and methodologies to incentivize companies to build here with the right economics. Because we often say we're not competing against foreign companies. In many cases, we're competing against foreign governments. And I think the United States now recognizes that we need to subsidize certain programs in order to be competitive in the future. So from an overall supply chain perspective, Flo will be working with key customers and supply partners to set up a seamless and transparent flow of information capturing demand, supply, and cost at every node of the supply chain. And we believe the government is going to be doubling down in these efforts and supporting others' efforts as we try to create a healthy future for all Americans.
Well, Eric and Frank, this has been really informational. We only have about a minute left, so I was wondering if either of you gentlemen or both of you, if you'd like to leave our audience with any parting remarks or thoughts about what you're doing and the importance of what you're doing.
Frank, go ahead, please.
Yeah, one thing that we didn't touch on, John, that I think is really important with regards to onshoring this activity is developing green processes with low carbon footprints.
Great point.
And this is something that the Biden administration obviously has as a high priority. Pharma processes generate huge amounts of waste, and every one of the processes that we're developing are reducing the amount of waste being generated in these essential medicines by orders of magnitude. And that's what we need to be doing in order to be able to assure that not only are we producing them cost effectively, but with an environmentally friendly approach to making the molecules.
And I'll just say we're proud to be a B Corp. We are an impact-driven company, and going to Frank's comments, sustainability is important for us, as well as transparency. And we think that we can really reinstill confidence in the pharmaceutical supply chain, and we're going to do it right here in Central Virginia.
Well, Frank and Eric, thank you both so much for your time and for giving us some insights into what Phlow is doing and how important it is. Thank you very much, and we wish you continued success, not just for your own benefit, but for the world's benefit, quite frankly. And ladies and gentlemen, I really hope you enjoyed this conversation. I'd like to now throw it back to the conference for a resumption of a great schedule. Thanks.
Thank you.